Thanks for everything you guys are doing for kids at all times, but particularly now.
Well, how are you coping with isolation? Boring question, but we all have our different sort of mechanisms. How are you finding it?
Well, I think the first thing that we did is we completely rearranged the house. So there's furniture, there's desks, there's makeshift desks. I've been sequestered in the dining room right now. The kids are upstairs playing. They're doing some sort of Lego challenge as we speak. So at some point the doors may burst open and we may hear some hurrahs or throes of defeat. I'm not sure, but we're doing okay. We've got a bit of a schedule, a bit of a routine going. Both my wife and I work more than full time, so we're juggling like probably everybody is. And it's hard, but I think at the same time I do recognize it's a privilege in a way. This is time in our kids' lives that they're young. I've got boys that are 10 and 7, and we're never going to get this time back. And actually, it's a bit of a privilege to be able to have lunch together every day and sit side by side and work on some of the school problems. It just means I start work very early in the morning, and I often work quite late at night.
Yeah, because I imagine like parents' views of their children is only seen through the lens of school reports. So actually, to have like this chance to see actually what kids, us, or what we like and what we don't like, what we shy away from, what we excel in, is actually you're like finally an insider into their lives, which is great.
That's exactly right. No, it's funny. There's a lot of teachers in my family. I've always had a lot of respect for teachers, but man, do I have a lot of respect for teachers now.
Yeah.
So Jeff, perhaps you could just give us a little mini summary of how you got into what you're doing and tell us a bit about Alienated.
Yeah, sure thing, Henry. It's funny. I came late in many ways. I came late to this industry, and I came late to writing. I've worked a number of different jobs over my career, and I transitioned into entertainment about 15 or 16 years ago. And for a while, I was basically managing other people's creativity. I used to run the Enid Blyton estate. I basically helped take books and turn them into TV shows. And at one point I thought, gosh, I would like to actually maybe have a literary estate of my own. Why don't I try and put pen to paper? So most authors that you meet will say, oh, I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always wanted to be an author. I've been writing since I was a kid or whatever. And I really didn't give myself permission to be creative professionally until I was over 35. And so I didn't get published until I was 35 or 36, I guess. So it took a while, and I've now got a number of books out, and I wear a bunch of different hats. I help other people get their TV shows made from almost always from books. I still like that intersection book to screen, but really what I do now is just sort of dream things up all day and write it down.
So cool.
We have an early question I've got to take from the audience, which is, does this guy Jeff think aliens actually exist?
That is a great question. I don't have a good answer. The best answer I could come up with, and it's not wholly original, which is the universe is such a vast place, and I'm cribbing from Carl Sagan here. It would be an awful waste of space if there weren't something else out there.
I think that's a very good way of doing it. And on that note, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about Alienated. And I know you've got perhaps a little bit of your prologue for us.
Yeah, I thought I might do a very, very short reading. So Alienated is, actually, it's funny that we're meeting on Star Wars Day, May the 4th.
Yes.
Alienated is kind of a love letter to science fiction and to school, and is basically the story of the only 2 human kids at the high school for aliens at Area 51. And it's very much about this notion of figuring out, standing out versus fitting in, and figuring out that balance when you're in school. And so it's kind of a fish out of water story, but as I said, it's a bit of a love letter to science fiction. So I thought I do have a copy of the book right here. If you
have a good look at the cover, I want to see the cover up close.
There we go.
There we go.
I'll just read the prologue. It's very short. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
Okay. I placed the urn gently into the rocket, holding Mom's remains for the very last time. You're finally going to get your wings, I whispered, as I closed the metal hatch. The rocket was twice as tall as me, assembled from spare parts I'd scrounged around the base. I'd spent the last 8 months planning this launch, and calculated that the rocket would hit 60,000 feet, the edge of space, in 4 minutes and 32 seconds. I was determined to grant Mom the one thing in death she always dreamed of in life, but never achieved, her astronaut wings. I considered inviting Dad and Jessica to the launch, but I knew they just wouldn't understand. This was between Mom and me. You see, rockets were our thing, our shared love. She always encouraged me to pursue rocketeering, no doubt channeling her own unfulfilled space dreams. So while most people at the US Air Force Base in Gelsenkirchen were watching my twin sister Jessica belt out musical numbers in the school play, I kneeled down in the base's scrapyard beside my most ambitious rocket yet and lit the fuse. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Goodbye, Mom. 1. The rocket lit up the night sky, taking my mother to the heavens. It was a perfect launch and a perfect tribute, exactly 1 year since her death. And that's when I heard the sirens. So there's progress.
Good. I love it.
Yeah, so Sherman Capote is our protagonist. He's 14, and very sadly, his mom had passed away a year ago. And so he does the sweetest, stupidest thing imaginable, which is he lives on an Air Force base in Germany, and he launches her remains, her ashes, into space so that she can get her astronaut wings. Which basically, if you can imagine that really happening, would set off an international incident. And so the settlement between NATO and the Russians is this family needs to be sent away, never be heard from again. And where do you put people you never want to hear from again? Area 51.
Sounds great. I love it.
Can I ask what the inspiration was behind the book?
You know, it's a couple things. I think, you know, it's very much inspired by my high school years, and that feeling, you know, it's called Alienated because I think everybody at school at one point feels like an alien, feels like an outsider, and coming to grips with that. So that was sort of one inspiration. And the other was this notion of, you know, trying to figure out, as I said earlier, this balance between when do you stand out and when do you fit in? And I think so much of being a young person is about navigating that. So I kind of mashed those two things up and put all the things I love into the pot: Back to the Future, Star Wars, Grease, all sorts of pop culture references. Somebody called it Harry Potter meets Star Wars, which I thought was pretty cool. Those are two of my favorite things. So I think that's probably where the inspiration came from.
Well, I think you're talking to two of the least sci-fi fanatics, despite sort of loving kids' books and so on. I wanted to ask you a question about reading, because I've been told that you didn't get into reading very early on, and neither did I. And reading is often quite painful for children. Why is that so? And do you have any advice in terms of getting a broader interest in it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think there's so many folks have had that experience as being a young person and actually not getting into reading. And I always think with reading for pleasure, the key word is pleasure. It's got to be fun. You know, it's an entertainment form that should be as fun or as compelling as video games or films or television. You know, I came very, very late to reading, and I think if I were to go back, if I were to help my sort of 13 or 12-year-old version of myself, it would probably be to make sure two things really. One is give permission that actually maybe it's not your favorite thing. I think a lot of people, there's a lot of pressure that reading has got to be, you know, you've got to read, and it doesn't come as naturally to everybody. And the second thing, and this is where I think librarians are incredibly important, is to work through different books to find the book for the child. I think there is a book for every child. And I certainly was probably, you know, we didn't have a lot of books in my house when I was young. And so we probably didn't find that book. And it wasn't until a little bit later, I was very lucky to have a dedicated librarian that, you know, they kept trying, try this one. And I think if you work at it long enough, I think the other thing I would say is, and the parents will know this, what kids really crave is attention from their parents. And if you could habitualize that as special time, the phone's got to be away, it's sacred time. You know, even if you're not getting high quality reading, I think that's another big thing. But the last thing I would mention, which I think a lot of parents turn their noses up at, is I'm a big believer that any written word is reading. And so a lot of people think it's got to be something worthy, or it's got to be a classic, nonfiction, comic books, the sports pages, because reading is a habit. So just getting into the habit in a way is more important than what you're actually reading. The back of the cereal box, you know, I don't actually care what it is. What I do care about is the habit.
Very good advice. Can I ask, you got into reading, you then got into writing even later, as you described earlier. What would be some top tips for some of those authors of tomorrow who are listening?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the one thing I would listen, the one great thing about any creative enterprise, particularly today, because of technology that we've got, writing uses pretty old technology. We basically use, dead trees to write on. But whether it's writing or filmmaking or whatever it is, there's so many amazing technology that's available. So you don't have to ask permission. You can just do it. And so if it's writing, what I would say is get your flying hours in early. So if you enjoy writing, do more of it. I'm a big fan of habits. So find a day part. Maybe it's early in the morning, maybe it's on the bus ride home, where you can just get something down on paper. That's the first thing. And the second thing is give yourself permission that it's probably no good. I think it's okay to do something that's rubbish. I'm a huge believer in the process of creativity. And I think one of the things we often do as a society that's a disservice is we see amazing, brilliant things come out, but we don't talk about the hard work behind it. We don't talk about the process that, that Hilary Mantel novel was written 18 times. I'm a big believer that writing is rewriting. So the first thing would be start early, start now. You don't need anybody's permission to write something. And again, the same thing is for if you want to, film something, you could do it on your phone. So start early and give yourself permission that it's probably rubbish, and that's okay because it's all about the iteration.
I'm going to ask a question which I never thought I would ask, which is about the comprehension. So we speak to kids every single day, and we teach them a lot. And without doubt, the task that they hate most is the comprehension. If you're doing homework, I've got to do comprehension. If it's whatever, and I'm amazed that the way that teachers teach the comprehension hasn't been modernized in the sense of university tutorials and critical thinking and writing analysis. Do you have any advice on that element of English, on inference, on understanding text in that sense from a teaching perspective?
I don't think I've got any blinding insight. I think that the two things that come to mind for me, and listen, we struggle with this at home as parents. As I said, I've got a 10-year-old, and in fact, he was doing comprehension over the weekend. One is I'm always amazed. There's a disconnect when you ask somebody to play back their comprehension answers orally. They get it, right? They get it. The disconnect, I think, seems to be about writing it down. And I think a big part of it is to make, again, it comes back to this idea of making it okay for things to be a little bit rubbish. I'm not saying total rubbish, but a little bit rubbish, in that don't make perfect the enemy of the good. I think so much of what we ask kids to do, particularly in comprehension, is get it right. I actually think it's better if you give somebody permission, get it mostly right. Because mostly right is pretty good. You can always go back and make improvements or changes. But I'm always amazed that when you have a conversation with somebody about something that they've just read, they pretty much, it's there. But in the translation from here to the written word, to the assignment, I think the fear is, oh God, it's got to be perfect. And I think that aspiration towards perfection can be very damaging and limiting.
That's great advice then for anyone listening, is that don't have to get it 100% right.
Can I ask, Jeff, you had an interesting transition into writing, as you kind of alluded to earlier, working on the estates of Enid Blyton and Agatha Christie. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone out there on this list of people listening, they have read an Agatha Christie or an Enid Blyton. And I know that some kids listening will be fascinated by those authors. Was there anything you took from those experiences that kind of helped your understanding of what they'd done that was so special?
Yeah, it's a good question. I read very forensically. I watch forensically and I read forensically. So I'll watch a movie 3, 4, 5, 6 times. I read film scripts and I read books forensically. And what I mean by forensically is I try and deconstruct what's going on behind what's on the page. And I think both Agatha Christie and Enid Blyton were masters of their art form in their own way. Obviously, they're completely different authors and completely different styles. But having the privilege of working on those estates gave me the time and the opportunity to sort of deconstruct the craft. For Agatha Christie, it's about suspense. For Enid Blyton, I think the big thing I took away was hooking the reader and keeping the reader wanting to turn the page. I mean, people can debate whether those books are well written or poorly written or whatever, but if you give the famous five to somebody, even today, they will still burn through it as a page turner. And I think she's clearly, she was doing something right. But by the way, in the 50s.
Yeah. Can I ask also, not to accuse you of being an alien yourself, but you're not native to here, you're Canadian, and you've lived in the States for a long time as well. Have you noticed any key differences between those different worlds and kind of the worlds of writing and reading within them?
I have a bit, yeah. I mean, I've been here in the UK for almost 15 years, which is hard to believe. But yeah, I grew up in Canada, and then I worked in sort of middle America, and I went to business school in the US and worked in Hollywood. One of the things that I found that's interesting, and I think we should be very proud of in this country actually, is that we tend to get children reading earlier. And the good thing with that is they have a better opportunity of finding the reading for pleasure slightly younger in life. I find it particularly in the US, kids, they just come a bit slower to it. It's a longer on-ramp. And so they don't often have the opportunity to entertain themselves with a book because their reading skill isn't quite as developed as, say, the equivalent 10-year-old here. I've got lots of family and tons of friends in both Canada and the US, and I sometimes have to bite my tongue when I talk about what my kids are reading, because it may come across as boastful. But I think here in the UK, we've got an incredibly literate culture. And you see it, frankly, with the newspaper culture as well, which is people, Shakespeare. And I mean, we're a very literate culture. And I think that we should be very proud of that. And it's a massive advantage, because if you can allow a child to read a little bit on the earlier curve and then be able to have them entertain themselves with a book, that does become a category of entertainment. Whereas I think in the US, it comes later. And so it's, as I said earlier, if you're not that great of a reader, you don't really like it, there's a bit of a downward spiral. So I think that is one thing we should be, aware of and frankly a bit proud of here. But I've definitely noticed that as a difference.
Well, there you go. Everyone who's listening, we're a literate bunch. So congratulations.
Certainly are. Well, Jeff, we're now going to move into the second part of our interview, which is our quick fire round.
Okay.
I've taken questions from the audience, and it's a sort of yes or no, either or kind of system of question and answer. And we're going to start with Josh's question. Are you a morning or afternoon person?
Definitely morning person. Yeah, definitely.
Max Lane Fox says, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book is The Great Gatsby, but wait till you're older to read it.
Izzy says, what's your favorite TV show?
Great question, Izzy. My favorite TV show of all time is one you've probably never heard of, called Twin Peaks.
Twin Peaks, okay. I want to know the first place you'll go when we're out of isolation.
Back to Canada.
Back to Canada. Tom says, do you write on paper or with a laptop?
Good question. Both. I plan on paper and I write on the laptop.
Plan on paper, write on the laptop. Nice. Star Wars or Star Trek?
I love them both, but I'm a child of Star Wars.
Fantastic. Twitter, a force for good or evil?
Very much both. I've met some fantastic people through Twitter, but I think also people's bad sides can come out when they're anonymous.
Fantastic. And favorite author is my question to finish.
Margaret Atwood, also Canadian.
Margaret Atwood. There we go.
Very good. Decisive. I love that. You were so on it. Some people, I don't know. Straight in there. Nobody likes.
Well, great questions from the crowd as well. That was awesome to
really good questions.
Great. Okay.
I think it's time for Biscuit Face.
I think it's time for Biscuit Face.
Yeah, you thought you got away with it there, didn't you?
I did bring
an excellent choice of biscuit.
I'm flat out of biscuits. You
I need to get mine then. Oh my goodness.
For all those who are new to the show, this is at the end of every show we play Biscuit Face, which is in the States they call it cookie face or something, or beat the cookie. So if you haven't got a biscuit with you, go to the kitchen, grab your biscuit and come back. And you're going to be competing against Jeff. You've got 30 seconds. And the aim of the game, because we never explained this properly, is to get your biscuit from your forehead into your mouth without touching it with your hands. And the trick is not too much speed at the top.
Okay. I'm allowed to take my glasses off, right?
I would suggest you do.
So I've got the timer. Henry's got the board. Only a few of our guests have actually completed it.
My advice would be, Jeff, you have 30 seconds, but you only really need one good attempt, so go slow with it.
Okay. All right.
Here we go in 2,
before.
in 1. Let's go.
The Oreo's a bit ribbed.
Oh! Am I allowed a second attempt?
Yeah, as many as you want.
This was much easier with the...
That's good. Jeff, we thought we had it on the shoulder.
It's a very heavy biscuit.
One more go.
I don't think I chose well. Tasty but heavy.
Henry's within distance. Oh. Oh. Oh.
Eyelash. Use the eyelash.
Go on. Yeah.
Very good.
Very good, Jeff. 34 seconds.
Is that good? How do I rank? How's it on the leaderboard?
Well, there are 5 out of 8 here who didn't even manage it. So it puts you in the top 4 straight away. Top 3.
Do I get to eat the biscuit now?
I think you get to eat the biscuit.
Absolutely, you do. You get the big biscuit, and also you get a big thank you from us, Jeff. We really appreciate you joining us. Super inspiring listening to you speak. And I very much hope that some of these kids get to benefit from you when you go back to speaking in schools.
Where can we find your book? On Amazon?
Yeah, it's pretty much everywhere. Amazon, Waterstones, all the online places. Hive, which is a website that allows local independent booksellers to get it to you.
Yeah. Cool. I'll get it after this interview. Jeff, thanks for joining us. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, Jeff.